ask a question at any time. So I'm Henry Bittaker. I'm currently the PDO of the Treasure Coast section, and I'll be the Florida chapter of PDO starting January 1st. Tonight, we're just going to focus on basically the application process that it's new from APA. That's going to be for the May exam. And because it's significantly changed, I thought I'd hold a separate session on this. Our normal study group sessions will start mid-January, probably on a Thursday night, just like we are tonight. And there'll be an email that comes out about that. If you're not signed up for the study group and you found out about this other ways, because we put announcements out other ways, go ahead and send me an email. Let me know your APA number. That's in case I can't find you on the APA directory. Then I can allow you to have access to the FPC site. And I'll send out an email to everybody on my list tomorrow that will include the recorded session here and a couple of the other bulletins that are marked up so that you can have them for the application process. All right. Tonight, what we're going to cover is we're going to cover mine and Susan's planning background. She's not going to be involved tonight because she's got a conference call right now that she's on for the next hour or so. And I'm going to cover the candidates program briefly, just to let you know how it gets affected or doesn't get affected by this change. And then we're going to cover some of the key new exam application documents and other documents, and the application exam timeframes. Then I'll explain the application process alternatives that are new for you for taking the regular exam. And then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the essays, the requirements, and some insights I have because I'm actually a peer reviewer over the application essay process. And so I review a number of the essays. I'm one of about probably around 8 or 10 national peer reviewers that they've called in to look over what APA staff does. And if we disagree, then it goes to a third round of review. All right, my background, I'm actually a scientist by background training. My degrees.
Hi, Henry, did you start the presentation? I cannot hear anything.
You cannot hear anything? Somebody else, tell me that you can hear me. Or
I can hear you.
I can hear you well.
I can hear
Okay.
you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
You might have to check on your computer then, because apparently a number of other folks can hear me. Okay. Anyway, so my background's biology, physics, oceanography. I have 14 years at the State Growth Management Agency, Department of Community Affairs, and 14 years at the Water Management District, a regional agency of the state. I got my actual certification in 2003 because I was required to for a position I was moved into at the Water Management District. Shortly after that, I was talked into being the Treasure Coast Section Professional Development Officer, focusing on the exam prep. I've been doing it ever since for about the last 16 years, as has Susan. And then I was appointed, then elected as the chapter vice president for certification maintenance. 2011, primarily because of our exam prep efforts, Susan and I won the APA National Volunteer Leadership Award from the Chapter President Council of APA. And I was, and Susan were both involved with the APA Exam Prep 3.0 guide. In fact, 4 out of the 10 national faculty came from my exam prep sessions. Normally, the way we do it is I normally teach about half the session, and we have AICP outside presenters doing the other half. Because of the coronavirus, I did it all myself, with the exception of a couple recorded sessions in the summer and the fall. And I'm also, as I mentioned, there a peer reviewer. And I was the chapter's professional development officer for 2 terms, and I was term limited. Then I've been working on the new exam update from the Chapters President's Council that will come out sometime this next year. And 2020, I was inducted into the Fellows of AICP. And then starting, as I mentioned, January 1st, I'll be the chapter PDO. Susan's background is similar a little bit. She worked in history, though, and was a public administration graduate. She worked with John DeGrove, who's sort of the guru of growth management in Florida. He set up all the growth management laws dealing with comp plans and things like that, the smart growth planning in Florida. And Susan, like me, retired in 2011. She was 36 years at the Water Management District, dealing with developments of regional impact, Everglades restoration, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually came down to South Florida to be with her. And some of her planning background is she was one of the co-founders of the very successful Palm Beach County Planning Congress that's interdisciplinary here locally. Architects and attorneys and planners and other groups. And she got her certification back in '94. She shared with me the volunteer leadership program. Like I said, she was faculty for history on the 3.0, and she currently is the Treasure Coast Section Board, and she was inducted into the Fellows in 2018. So there's a picture of the two of us, and I'm going to stop for a second and just check to make sure everybody's unmuted. Heather, I just unmuted you, so you're fine. And Joe, I unmuted you. Kaylin, I unmuted you. And Leanne, Ling, and Lewis again, Mari. Vanessa, I've unmuted you. Xing Ying, unmuted you. Okay. So anyway, that's the picture of the two of us. Let's take the candidates program first because it's unchanged basically. The candidates program, which is intended for new planners that have just recently graduated from PAB accredited planning schools. It's a program that's a pilot program. They can, without getting the needed work experience, be able to take the exam. And if they pass it, they then can qualify as a AICP candidate. But that program remains unchanged by the new changes. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. If you're in the candidate program, your path that you have to take is you first enroll in the program, showing that you're recently graduated. Then you test for the exam. You earn your work experience and gain your 16 certification maintenance credits. You submit your planning experience once you get it, however many years you need. And then you submit your criteria essays in that order. For more details, you can go see that link. We'll talk about it only briefly here. Up on top is the, up till now, the traditional sequence of if you're going to take the regular AICP exam, you got your education, you got your professional experience, you did your exam, have submitted your essays, and then you became AICP. The candidates program is you enrolled, you take the exam, you become a candidate. Once you take the exam, you later submit your planning experience and your essays, and then you become AICP. Until you do all that whole step, you're called AICP candidate. The new flexible traditional sequence that APA has just come out with for the regular AICP exam test takers is you apply for your certification, that's your education and employment verification, and then you can either take one of two routes. You can either say, okay, I want to do just like we've done in the past, submit the planning essays, and then once you do the planning essays, you can take the certification exam. If you pass, you become AICP. Or the new alternative is you apply for certification, you get checked off on your education and employment, and you go ahead and take the certification exam. And then after you pass the exam, you come and submit your planning experience essay, your work essays, and then if those are approved, then you become AICP. This is a flexible option that is more like the candidates program because that has become very popular. Part of the positive on this is it up to previous to now, if you were doing the regular process and you came through and did your work stuff, your education, and got your essays all approved, and then you took the exam and failed it, to retake the exam, you had to pay the full exam price of as if you were just came through the essays and everything. So APA has broken this up to make it a little more flexible. We'll see that in a second. But the key documents you want to be sure you look at if you're going to apply and take it for May, is you want to look at these 3 new guides. And you see a general link where you can find them, but these have information on eligibility, your fees, your registration, your application criteria, your exam site scheduling, your transfer, your scoring of the exam, and that's at plan.org/certification/eligible. And you'll see there's 3 different bulletins there. One that deals with the certification application process, a separate one that deals with certification experience essays, and a third one that deals with just registering and taking the exam. And those are all things that you need to be looking at. I'll give you the first 2 tonight as part of the class. I'll put them on the FTP site. And if we have time, we'll talk about them. Here is the new, very confusing May application and exam timeframes. I've marked things in the same color if they're part of the same type of process. So you'll see like blue, that's the application window opens January 5th. The application deadline, if you're submitting your essays and taking the exam the same cycle, is January 19th. If you're, however, just doing the application, going to just take the exam and later do your application, that application deadline is April 2nd. And these are brand new deadlines just from a couple days ago, because I was actually doing this slide, and while I was doing this slide, they changed the dates on me. And I talked to APA about whether there's any other major changes, and it doesn't appear to be. So that's the application process in terms of when the window opens, when the deadline is, if you're going to submit your essays also this same cycle, and then the final application deadline, if you're not going to submit your essays, you just want to apply, it's going to be April 2nd. Then if you are going to do your essays, the process there is that the process for doing your essays starts as early as February 9th. If you want to do the expedited essay review, and the advantage to that is you're going to have 3 questions that we're going to go over in detail that you have to address your work experience in and show how you've done planning the way APA considers planners to do planning. If you want to make sure that if there's a problem with them, you have the ability to correct that in the same window, you do the expedited essay review process. Now that will cost you an extra $70, but what happens is they'll expedite it, they'll come back with an answer to you, tell you what's wrong with it if there's a problem, and then you'll have a week to correct it. We'll talk about this a little bit more. But anyway, the expedited essay review window opens February 9th. The review window closes for that February 16th. The regular essay window opens February 16th. This is if you don't want to either pay for or want to do the expedited review. It's open February 16th, then closes February 23rd. And then the last thing here is registration. For those of you that are candidates or previously approved, and we'll talk about this, these different options for different in progress status, your exam registration opens on January 5th, and it and the transfer deadline closes on April 30th. The window for the exam is now May 1st to 25th. That just changed a day and a half ago. Okay, so what are the costs? The cost for doing just the application is $70. If you then want to just go from application to taking the exam, then the exam is $220. Okay. All these other things are other avenues. If you want to do the application and the essays, that's 70 plus 220 plus 220. If you want to do the expedited essay, it's additional $70. There are appeal process and there are transfers to another exam window. That runs $100 for the essay appeal or $100 for transfer fee. We'll talk about these a little bit more in detail. Everybody understand the basic time frames? Anybody have any questions? Okay, I'll go on. Feel free to ask me a question as I go on, if you have one. Okay, this is from APA. This is a FAQ about, well, what if I've already started the process previously, like we had one question, I think from Tracy. What if I'm in progress? How does this all affect me now? Okay, well, for approved applicants, those are applicants that already had their certification application and their essay done. All they need to do is test. They can go directly to the registration for the certification exam, which opens that window January 5th to April 30th. And they just go right to register and can register when the window opens. The fees have been restructured and the cost to test is now $220. So you can test in person or you can do at home. When we start up doing our regular training, I'll have a little bit more detail about that and compare what the experiences were in the summer for the May exam versus what they were in November. The short answer is it was a disaster for a lot of people in the summer when they first started to allow this at home because of the coronavirus. There were lots of problems. The reverse is true for what happened in the fall. There were very few problems. I only know of one person that really ended up having to retake their exam, and APA allowed them because of problems with doing it at home and upstairs neighbors deciding to have a major rap session, and that person was able to retake the exam and pass the exam. So, but we'll talk about that when we do our training starting in January. Okay, so if testing remotely, then you need to look at the ProProctor user guide, and I gave you a link for that, and tells you all how you do it. Because if you're going to take it at home, you have to make everything around you basically sterile, in the sense that you can't have anything showing like having a TV or other types of things around you. They have to be able to see that you're not cheating and doing things like that. And there's a lot of details about how they do that. Okay, well, what about if you had submitted your application and gotten your education approved and your work experience approved, but you had a denied essay and you never got that completed? Well, in that sense, what you do is you come in and you revise your essay in that February timeframe. For expedited, if denied, submit the essays during the same cycle, or you do it during the regular cycle starting February 16th. So if you just had a denied essay, you come in and try to get it approved. All right, but you can still register to test for the exam without that essay approval if you want, because of the new option that's allowed. So if you got through the application work and education before and you just don't have denied access, one additional option for you now is you can just go ahead and register and take the exam. If you do pass the exam, you'll have to come back and do your essays at some time before you can call yourself AICP. All right. So you'll have to, and those essays can only be submitted in those exam windows. That this one is in February, and the other one will probably be in the summer sometime. I don't know how they're going to redo the schedule exactly, but it will be probably the summer. Maybe, whoops, I don't know what happened here. Okay, let me see what's good. Our early fall. I'm not sure when that new time frame is going to be. And the fees have been restructured. While it's more expensive to submit the essays than it previously was, it's cheaper to test for the exam. And again, about testing alternatives that you have either at a center or at home. And it could be at work too, by the way. It doesn't have to be at home. It can be at work if you can find like a room that is sterile. Like we had one person do it, that there was nothing really on the walls. There was no TV, no computers besides the one they were using. So they were able to do it successfully at their workplace. As long as they're undisturbed, nobody's coming in and out the door, because if that happens, they could disallow your test. All right, third in progress status. Testers who previously failed, all right? What do they do? Well, if you're all fully approved, all you need to do is test again. So all you need to do is register during the January to April timeframe. And the test is now not going to cost you upwards of $400. Just to test, it's going to cost you around $220. So that's sort of the good news. And then you have that option of testing at a center or testing at home. And if you're going to test at home, look at the ProProctor user guide. All right, transfer applicants. If you signed up to take the exam, you were ready to take the exam, and you transferred to the May exam, again, all you need to do is you just need a test. So you just need to register during the window that registration is from January 5th to April 30th. Again, it's only $220 now, and you can do it either at a center or at home. For the candidates who can test, they are already enrolled in the program, and now all they need to do is test. They can register again in the magic time frame of January 5th to April 30th. And for candidates, one of their advantages is to take the exam. It's a little cheaper. It's $100. They get caught up later when they have to do their essays and to get their AICP. That's a little different cost for them. But you can test it in person or do it remotely. If they then pass the exam, then the next step is for candidates is that they have to submit their professional planning experience and then eventually their essays. They have to do that before they can transition from being an AICP a candidate who's passed the exam to AICP. Candidates who passed the November exam and just haven't submitted their stuff, then they need to use the new window to submit their planning experience. That's step 3 of the candidate program. So that's January 5th to January 19th. If they're going to submit their essays also in the same window. And then February, do their essays to complete their certification. If they're not going to submit their essays at this time, just their application work experience, educational experience, then they can use that larger January 5th to April 2nd. But then they're going to have to wait till another exam cycle before they can submit their essays. And for them, the cost is $0 to submit their planning experience, but it's $375 to submit their essays. All right. Have I lost anybody yet? Let me just check, make sure here real quickly that we've got basically everybody. Is anybody out there?
I'm
Go ahead.
here.
Okay.
Henry,
Yep.
I have a question.
I'm here.
I'm
Go
here.
ahead.
I'm here.
Suzanne,
Is,
go ahead.
am I hearing you correctly in that the application is valid, is no longer has just a 3-year validity?
That's correct. And we're going to talk about that coming up here at some point. But it's now, once you've done the application, which is your education and your work, and you've been qualified,
Mm-hmm.
there's no deadline for when it expires.
So my application and my essays expired, my 3-year window expired in November of 2020. So
Okay.
will I need to reapply and submit essays again?
That's a question for APA, and I do not know the explicit answer for it. I would contact Jennifer Raleigh at JROLLA@planning.org and ask her that question. Lay out all your information, or you can do it AICP exam at planning.org.
Okay.
Okay, But that's a question for APA to answer. And that's one we have not covered with them yet. Sorry.
Henry,
Yes.
this is Tara Lynn. So I think they changed that last year because I was scheduled to take the exam in May and I didn't with all the pandemic stuff. And I called and I said, hey, my 3 years is going to be up for me to take the exam. What do I do? And it's like, oh, don't worry about it. As of this year, once you're approved, you can just take the exam whenever. So the 3-year thing was
Okay.
before the November exam. They approved that.
So that sounds like it's very encouraging, but I would still ask them on your particulars just to make sure. Okay. But it
Right.
sounds like somebody that where it was going to expire in May, they were told they're okay. And that's where I think they'll go. I just don't want to tell you definitively because it's not my call.
No, I understand and I appreciate that.
Okay.
And thank you, Tara Lynn.
Yeah. And if you've had an experience and have other information like that, feel free to speak up. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. Okay. And although I've corresponded back and forth with APA, there's always these little nuances that I may not have thought to ask them. So anyway, start early. If you're going to do your essays particularly, because it can take some time to get your employment stuff together and construct a well-written essay if you're planning on submitting both before the exam. Your essays are what tend to take the most time, but sometimes you run into difficulty getting your transcript, and we're going to cover what counts on some of these. Getting your transcript, your educational information, or your work experience together. Prepare your application after reviewing the AICP application tips. There's a separate link here for that. They give you some more guidance. As I mentioned, your certification application approval does not expire any longer, and you'll not have to repeat that step in the path to certification once you're approved. Consider the expedited application window for essays. That's the expedited review. Used to be called early bird. Now it's called expedited. This allows you to provide your application within the same testing window if it has a problem and hear about your approval. If there is a problem, you're able to fix it within about a week, but it does cost you an extra $70 to do the expedited review. Carefully reflect the APA criteria in your essays. They've gone to a lot of work, and I've beaten on them for years to be more explicit on what they want as part of this application process, and they've listened to me and others, and I think they've put together some really good bulletins that really tell you what they want. And I've highlighted some of that I'll give you, and if we have time, we'll go over it a little bit. But look at what they're saying, and this is true particularly for the essays. If they say they want that this way, you need to do it. If they say this is the only ways you can do your educational experience demonstration, do it that way, one of those 3 ways. Okay, let's see. So some general application info. The application process is done entirely online. So important documents need to be scanned into PDF format, although for the diploma, transcripts are also acceptable. It's a format that the universities and things use. You'll need to have read the AICP Code of Ethics prior to applying online, and because as part of the application process, you have to agree to comply with its provisions. So you need to review, make sure you're comfortable with knowing the ethics, because once you become AICP certified, you have to live by the ethics code for the actions you take as a planner. Otherwise, you possibly risk sanctions or even loss of your AICP. The $70 application fee is due when you submit your application. APA will email you with the application status within 4 weeks of submission. If your application is approved, you'll be able to register to take the test for the certification exam, and then submit your planning experience essays in whatever cycle you desire. If you use that expedited review timeframe for your application, then you'll be able to submit the essays in the same cycle. If not, then you'll have to wait to a later cycle. And you may decide you want to do it that way because you don't have to pay for the essays until you pass the exam. Eligibility requirements. So what do you need to be able to take it? Well, first of all, you have to be a current member of APA. Okay, so make sure that you are a current member if you're going to apply. You have to have been engaged in professional planning either currently or in the past as defined by AICP, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Basically, they want you at the time of application, and I recently got asked this question. Do I have to have all my experience at the time of application or is it the time of test? It's a time of application. You have to have your full amount of work experience and educational experience. So if you've gone to a PAB graduate degree in planning, master's or doctorate, you just have to have that plus 2 years of planning experience. If you have a bachelor's from PAB accredited school in planning, then you can have 3 years of planning experience. If you're like I am, I got a graduate degree. Oops, sorry, I'm one more down. If you have a graduate degree in planning from a program not accredited by PAB, then you need to have at least 3 years of planning experience. If you're like I was, I have a graduate degree, but it's in science. I had to have four years of planning experience. Or if you have no college degree, you have to have 8 years in planning experience. Now, let's talk about educational experience first, then work experience, and then we'll get into some of the details on that, what those work experience can be. Educational experience, APA only accepts educational verification in one of 3 forms. You either have to be able to, remember this is all electronic online, so you either have to send them a basically PDF of the official Educational Institute transcript, and here they want you to open the sealed transcript, scan them, save them as a PDF and send them to them, or you can directly from the university, typically often get e-transcripts, also accepted. They must show the degree conferral date, the date you got your degree. A second way to do this is a photocopy of a diploma. You don't have to have a notary seal. They used to require that. Third way, if for instance you have some other type of issue that you don't have a diploma, you get a letter from a school dean, a registrar, or a program director confirming the graduation date that the degree was conferred. The letter must be printed on school university letterhead, include the letter writer's title and contact information. The verification must confirm that your degree is in planning, or you'll be put in the other category like I was, a non-planning degree, okay? All right, job documentation verification. APA no longer requires a letter from your employer. That makes it simpler, more straightforward. You provide your employment information along with a detailed summary of your planning responsibilities for each position directly within the AICP application. You need to discuss professional employment information for each position, and you need to address the employer, your position title, your dates of employment, whether it's full-time or part-time, your current former supervisor, the phone number of that supervisor, and detailed summary of the professional planning task and responsibilities. All right. Now, APA is basically looking for 3 types of things that's going to be shown up in your work experience. And these are the criteria they'll later use for their essays. They want professional planners to demonstrate a professional level of responsibility and resourcefulness while applying a planning process appropriate to the project or situation. We'll cover this in more detail. They want professional planners to evaluate multiple impacts to the community when implementing professional planning tasks. And they want professional planners to have influence public decision-making in the public interest. So what often is not considered planning experience? Work in site planning, engineering, land surveying, traffic engineering design, community organizing, social work. Those are not necessarily considered planning. You'd have to make a strong case for why it should be. Likewise, experience in related fields like law, architect, landscape architect, or engineering, typically not considered planning experience. Market research, analysis, business development, serving as elected appointed officials, even if that's on city councils, board of commissioners, planning commissions, boards of zoning appeals, and citizen advisory boards. Those are classically not considered as from APA as being a planning experience. What may be planning experience? Professional planning experience in a foreign country, part-time planning work or planning internships, as long as those internships are not part of required coursework for a grade. And I got them to add this a few years ago, volunteer planning work that involves substantive planning activities. I remember a classic review that person did volunteer work that was right exactly what planning should be doing. And APA wasn't going to count it because it wasn't volunteer planning experience. However, if it is volunteer planning, it has to be listed in your employment to be used as part of your essay. So if you're going to have an essay example based on work that you did while you're volunteer and it's to be considered as part of your planning experience, you have to show that volunteer work in your list of employment with all those criteria that we showed before. Also, what may count is planning work in specialized functional areas, such as economic development, energy policy, airport military base planning, historic preservation, recreational planning, and on and on and on. Also, academia can count if it's in planning. Research analysis and teaching and planning can be justifiable. One that I had a number of years ago that I had to think about, and APA and I agreed on it, was that we had a Peace Corps volunteer working in Northern Africa that was involved and used planning techniques to help local women develop their economic development for the types of industries that they were doing. And the Peace Corps volunteer very eloquently put together a step-by-step process showing the type of planning techniques that they were using to involve these women for their betterment in economic development. So there could be some strange one. This is non-traditional planning experience. People with non-traditional professional level planning experience are encouraged to apply if they can demonstrate how their experience meets the criteria for professional planning that's listed in the AICP application. And this is an example, was this Peace Corps volunteer. For more details and a lot more on this, look at page 10 of part 1 AICP guide at that link. Okay, let's talk about, we've talked about education, we've talked about the work, now let's talk about the essays, which is the heart of what people have difficulty with. Classically, about 1/3 of all applicants don't get through the application process. That turns out to be about the same percentage that don't pass the exam. Typically about 2/3 of applicants qualify to take the exam, and then about 2/3 of those people that take the exam pass the exam. We've had a little bit better luck in our study group, and we'll talk about that when we in mid-January when we start. Anyway, essays. Each criterion response must be between 250 and 500 words and address only one specific example from your professional experience for each essay to illustrate your alignment with the criteria. So you're going to have 3 essays you're going to have to do. Those 3 points we put, we're going to go back to them and go in more detail in a little bit. So each response needs to be 250 to 500 words. You should take only one specific example. You need to talk about what work experience you were doing, what it was, and we're going to talk about this in more detail. Each essay must be based on the member's verified and application listed professional experience, but you don't need to address the entirety of that experience. So you don't need, if you're going to have one example for this job as a planner 2 that you did, you don't need to talk about everything you did as a planner 2. You just need to take one experience that meets the criteria for when you were that planner 2. But you need to say what it was so they can match up and know which job experience it was. And then applicants with experience in narrowly focused places of work, like say military base planning, should take particular care in showing relevant experience. Some do's and don'ts generally. Here's some do's. Provide a unique response for each criteria. Note, only one response example required per criterion. Use the word I did this, I did that, and speak directly to your specific role and responsibility related to the described project work. Clearly describe your planning role. This is the #1 most common error in the applications I review. They don't say what their role is. They don't say, I did this and I did this. Even if it's a team thing, you say, here's what I did on the team, and justify how you're meeting the criteria. You don't want to say, we did this, or my team did that, okay? In terms of if you're a manager and my staff did that, okay? That's not going to make it on this on the essays. It's what you did, so use I, here's what I did. Proofread your response and ensure the response is not too complicated in sentence structure for the reviewer. I've had some where the write-up lasted 10 or 12 lines for one sentence, and you lose your thought where it is. Break your sentences down, make them very distinct, discrete, good writing. That's one of the things you're supposed to be a professional planner. Should by this time know how to write. Make sure you try to do that. Ensure that the responses address each of the items listed in the planning experience essay checklist, which is in guide #2. If we have time, we'll show that to you, but otherwise it will be highlighted in yellow a little bit so you can take a look at it. There's the link for it. Okay, some don'ts, general. These are general on the don'ts. Don't simply list different types of planning processes you applied without describing your role. Oh, I've done subdivision, I've done building permit, I've done whatever, but they're not getting to the criteria, how they apply, how a particular example, particular episode applies to meeting that criteria. Don't do generalities that way. Don't write about yourself in the third person. Fortunately, we had a otherwise sort of decent write-up, but it said, Henry Bittaker did this, blah, 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 blah. Henry Bittaker did that, blah, blah, blah. We didn't know whether the person submitting it wrote it or whether somebody else wrote it for him. So don't write about yourself in the third person. Use I, all right? Don't simply, and this is more complicated because it was coming from a foreign country. So anyway, it doesn't work doing it in the third person. Don't simply discuss the details of projects instead of discussing your planning role on a project. Don't discuss working with the public without making the connection to how you influence the decision-making of elected appointed officials. And don't use an example that is incomplete or not yet approved. We'll talk about it a little bit more. For managers and directors, they have some unique problems sometimes on this. I remember having to agree to deny a planning director who had about 25 years experience because their whole write-up was about, well, my staff do this, or I direct my staff to do that, or they didn't say how they did things. So anyway, project managers, people with substantial experience, sometimes take for granted the application process. This is probably the third most common problem I see in my application reviews. Manager directors need to use examples that demonstrate their planning hands-on experience, not what their staff have accomplished, not a list of their administrative and managerial responsibilities when responding to criteria 1 and 2. They need to say what they've done, how they've met the criteria. So reminder, these essays are going to deal with basically these 3 criteria. How professional planners demonstrate a professional level of responsibility resources while applying the planning process appropriate to the project situation. How professional planners evaluate multiple impacts to the community when implementing professional planning tasks. How professional planners influence public decision-making in the public interest. So those, you're going to have 3 examples, each unique for each one of those, tied to your work experience, and you're going to have to flesh them out. Here's some of the way to do that a little bit. The first one, dealing with the planning process. So you're going to need to demonstrate a professional level of responsibility and resourcefulness while applying a planning process appropriate to the project or situation. So ensure that the response describes a planning process that you applied. Describe it in a step-by-step manner in appropriate detail. This is probably the second largest error in the reviews, people not doing this. Step by step by step. Now, I'm going to give you an example that's very easy if you do things like making a comprehensive plan. So the example is describe each of your step-by-steps in a project. Be explicit. So if you're dealing with putting together a new comprehensive plan, some of your steps would be like identifying issues and options. And then you're going to talk about what exactly you ran into with that and how you resolved it and where you went. Then you're going to go like stating goals, objectives, priorities. Again, what type of issues you ran into and how you resolved them. Then collecting and interpreting data, the same thing. Preparing and implementing the plan, same thing. And then evaluating the plan's impact if you got that far, and talking about what you came across and how that's going to change things in the future. So you have 250 to 500 words to try to deal with how you demonstrate a professional level of responsibility while applying a planning process appropriate to that project or situation. A step by step by step by step process. That's the thing that needs to be there, that step by step role. So choose a multi-step single project or process. Ensure that the project or process you describe involves substantive planning related principles and tasks that are not purely administrative or professional in nature. In other words, you want to, if you had walkability involved, if it's transportation analysis, or trying to do a transportation plan, what types of problems you ran into, etc. Ensure that the response is written in the first person, clearly indicating your role involvement in the planning process. Explain how you brought professional knowledge, technical skills, personal initiative, or other indicators of resourcefulness to the process you applied. If you had to do extensive citizen involvement, participation, and try to get a consensus on something, get into that a little bit. Ensure completed, and I did that intentionally, sick. Ensure completed response is reasonably free of grammatical and typographical errors and demonstrates a professional planning level to be expected from a certified planner. That's true for every criteria, but it does count against you. If we get essays that are full of grammatical or typographical errors, that counts against you. So spell check, look at them. And these are, presumably before you do your application, you're going to write all of this up, check all of this, and be able to cut and paste it in. So you should have time to try to do this. What doesn't comply with the criteria? Describing the details of project outcome rather than the steps of the process. Listing accomplishments of the team rather than describing your personal involvement with the planning process. You can be part of a team, but you need to deal with your individual personal involvement and how you dealt with the criteria. Things that apply to the criteria. Don't simply name different types of planning process you've involved with, rather than describing your role in carrying out the steps of a planning process. And don't discuss a failed project or process, or choose a project example comprising an administrative or pre-professional responsibility. APA used to allow you to describe one that didn't work, but they changed their mind, and about a year or so ago, they changed this that they don't want to have failed projects. All right, so any questions on criterion 1? Remember, this was criterion 1, demonstrate a professional level of responsibility while applying the planning process step by step appropriate to the project or situation. Any questions on that one before I go to criterion 2? Okay. Criterion 2. Evaluate multiple impacts to the community when implementing professional planning tasks. Here, you want to use a specific project example that clearly identifies a decision, policy, action, or planning intervention that demonstrates how you identified and evaluated multiple potential consequences of this planning. The simplest way to do that is have a project where you have multiple impact issues. So clearly list and demonstrate how you employed planning to consider both intended and unintended consequences that affect the quality of life in a community, such as, whoops, I don't know what. I don't know if my modem's just clicking once in a while or what, but anyway, some examples are community character, public safety, transportation, compatibility, walkability. Is just somebody tell me that you're there. Still there?
Yep,
I'm
we're
here,
here.
Henry. I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Just want to make sure because once in a while we've lost either a modem or the internet. If that happens, just stay on because it'll be fine for you. And if I can reconnect, even if I have to go to a hotspot, I'll get back on. Criterion 2, also discuss not just one, but multiple impacts addressing such things as environmental, economic, social, historic preservation issues, physical, spatial, health, safety, intergovernmental stakeholder concerns. Now, this was very easy for me to meet this criteria because I was involved for about 14 years in the development of regional impact program. So all we dealt with was dealing with impacts on the projects we were involved in. But you should have a project probably that has multiple issues. You don't want to take one that's just transportation and the only thing it is transportation. But if it gets into multimodal, if it gets into citizens being able to use it, if it gets into wetland impacts, if it gets into flooding or other types of things, those are all legitimate. So take one that's got multiple impact issues. That's your safest way for this particular criteria. Ensure that your specific project example adequately demonstrates how you applied such a comprehensive planning point of view in your actual practice, i.e., how you dealt with multiple impact issues, quality of life issues, rather than simply providing a general or aspirational response. And you can get into some details on each one of these. You know, if it's a flooding issue, you know, did you help develop the other means for trying to avoid that flooding affecting the project, or you know, whatever it is? You know, did you come up with an alternative to, rather than going to this wetland, that you went over to a little higher and drier area, whatever. Explain how your thought process led to specific work projects or decisions that affect that quality of life for the community you serve. If you went out and gathered information from the citizenry on what their concerns were that helped you design the project, that all counts. All that stuff gets into that. Okay, what doesn't work? Simply describing a project such as a comprehensive plan. I did a comprehensive plan. Okay. No. Working on multiple elements of a comprehensive plan does not equate to effectively addressing multiple issues. If you talk about, okay, there's a transportation element, there's a historic preservation element, and we had addressed these specific types of things to try to deal with how we were going to deal with historic preservation as part of new policies for that plan, that starts to get there. But not just saying I dealt with historic preservation element, I dealt with that, and not getting into what were the issues, how did you deal with them, what were your thought processes, things like that. The response needs to specifically tie the project back to how you considered multiple impact or issues. Okay. What doesn't comply? Simply listing different planning tasks you have performed or explain the general importance of applying a system approach to planning tasks. Well, zoning is a way to try to segregate the classic Euclidean different types of land uses, blah, blah, blah. No, what was a specific example? How did you apply planning? How did you get it, do things? So not generics. Don't use an example where your approach did not improve the community's quality of life or where it only involved one impact issue. So don't just focus on just transportation if all you can talk about is level of service on that roadway and not the other issues that may be involved. Try to find a different solution. Anybody got any more questions on criterion 2, value in multiple impacts to community? The most important thing here is to make sure you deal with multiple impacts and how you dealt with them. That's the single most important thing for that criterion. Criterion 3, then, public decision-making. Influence public decision-making in the public interest. Here, you want to ensure that the response, the essay, uses a specific example while identifying your position, showing how you or your work influenced the decision-making of elected or appointed officials in the public interest. You need to ensure that the response clearly identifies the decision makers, whether it's elected body, appointed body, or those other decision-making authorities. We've had examples where military planners have the military base commander as the decision-making authority. That's fine, as long as they can show how they influenced his decision on doing something with the base. And you want to make sure that you identify the specific decision that was influenced in the example. You'd be surprised how many people don't deal with the specific decision that was influenced. Ensure that the response clearly identifies the outcome, the actual decision that was influenced in the public interest. Ensure that the response describes how the influence decision was in the public interest. And this can be very broad types of influences that you have as planners, providing formal written recommendations. You know, you can be doing staff reports, and if your staff report was used by your planning director to influence the decision by the planning commission or by the city council, that can be fine, as long as you make that connection in that track of how that happens and what that discussion was a little bit like. Other examples, you know, providing public testimony, drafting research or policy briefs, preparing educational training materials, conducting educational training activities, presenting research findings, participating in advisory body meetings. And this can be from the private or the public sector. The example can address broad types of planner influence public decision making, such as influencing a legislative body voting on adoption or approval of a plan, ordinance, resolution, agreement, budget, project, or a chief elected official signing an executive order, or a planning commission voting on approval of a plan or discretionary use permit, zoning board voting on approval of a variance, city appointed official issuing an administrative rule or policy, judge or court issuing findings and conclusions, or a military base commander approving new base development. Those are
Henry,
all.
I have a question.
Yes.
Because you said that we're not supposed to do things that are denial, but if it was a variance that we were recommending denial on and we influenced the council to, you know, support us in that denial, would that be okay to utilize for this or no?
Probably. I haven't had that question since APA changed their direction on this, but they're basically, if they're going along with what you're recommending, that's usually the sense for what they're trying to go. What they're trying to avoid is where you recommended denial and it was approved, or where you recommended approval and it was denied.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. What doesn't comply? Use an example in which public officials made a decision that conflicted with your recommendations or analysis. Okay. Responses that focus on how you have worked with the public with no mention of either officials or decision making. Responses that focus on how you have worked to influence public decision making on a project without making the connections to actually influencing elected or appointed officials. Use an example in which the primary beneficiaries of the decision are a small number of private individuals or organizations rather than the general public. And use an example that has not come to resolution or for which no decision has yet been made. I've seen several well-written essays where they're trying to influence a particular project approval decision, but at the time they submit that, even though they make up to that point, they make a good argument, that decision hadn't been made. So they couldn't include the decision as part of this discussion. And that's APA, from APA, that's a no-no. They want that the decision, if it's going to be a decision, has come to resolution, or in some cases even been implemented, if you're trying to make that argument. Any other questions on influencing public decision making in the public interest? And remember, good examples are direct influence, but good examples can also be indirect influence, like a staff report. No questions? Okay, we'll go on then.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I was a zoning counselor for a couple of years, so I realized that I influenced the decisions, but it was not a big public. It was like individual cases, thousands of cases maybe, but I'm not sure that that qualifies. I would say no, but just in case, because I don't know how I'm going to uh, match this one or meet the
Okay.
criteria.
Well, when you made that decision, did you sometimes influence the decision that was made because to go with your recommendation, it'd be in the public interest to maybe not approve a particular zoning change? Or, and maybe I don't understand the rule you're doing exactly, because you used a term I'm not as familiar with. You said you were a zoning
Counselor,
counselor.
the person on the phone calling the county with zoning questions.
Oh, with zoning questions. Okay.
Mhm.
That may be a little tougher one, unless you somehow got them to change their zoning ordinance to try to address particular other provisions, and that might be be able to be demonstrated in the public realm. I'm not familiar with that particular role real well. So one thing to realize, guys, I've been a state planner and I've been a regional planner. I've never been a local planner. So if you ever hear me say something a little out of whack or deals with local planning, bring that up and we'll talk about it. But I'm not familiar with what a zoning counselor does as much. I understand what you're saying. You're asking questions about how the zoning code is applied, right?
Yes, it is correct.
Yeah, that one may be a little tougher to be able to demonstrate how that's influencing public decision making. Because what's the decision that's made? How would you identify a decision that's made that you would have influenced?
Yes, it is tough. It is definitely not
Okay,
going.
yeah. So that one may be a tough example. You may try to find some other example. And I'm just not sure how APA, I've never had an application that had that rule come up to try to justify or use as an example of a work that was meeting one of these criteria. So that one may be a difficult one. That may be something you want to talk with in advance to APA, what they think. Okay. That
Yes,
may
thank
maybe
you.
send them an email, tell them what you did, a little bit more detail, and ask them. They may give you an informal insight into some of that. But by the way, on the peer review that I do, I don't oversee the educational or work experience. I only oversee the essays. So when APA will they'll now separate it out. They do your work and your education and see whether you're qualified to take the exam. When you come to the essays, then there's the peer reviewers that basically are the second level. APA staff reviews them. They make their recommendation. We review them. And if we differ from APA staff, then it goes to a third round. That's the way the peer reviewer works. It's just that they want people with a lot of experience in some aspect of planning. And I've had a lot, but just not at the local level as much. Okay, does that help? Or that's about as much as I can give you direction, I think, on that one.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Application lifespan. As we mentioned before, approved applications no longer expire. You do not need to reapply in order to take the exam. You simply need to register your intent by paying the exam fee before the registration deadline. Okay, what happens if your essays are denied? There's two different variations of this. For the standard essays that were not the expedited, you'll receive the notification via email. The email will address the specific reasons behind the denial decision. They'll even potentially make some recommendations. And that's the final decision for that current exam cycle, except if you're doing expedited essays or you have an successful appeal. Denied applicants have the right to appeal the denial decision based on the information in their original submittal. Appeals that include new responses, significant revisions, or additional samples or information not addressed in the original responses will not be accepted. For more details on that, see part 2, page 12 of the guide, and it'll talk about that in more detail. Denied expedited essays. When you've gone the expedited essay process, you receive the benefit of that early notification of the essay's approval or denial. You get advanced notification of your review status, and you may submit revised essays within the same submission window if their initial submissions were denied, and you'll have 1 week to do that, as we'll see in a second. For the essays denied, you'll receive detailed feedback that provides the reason for the denial, so you can revise the essay. You will have 1 week from the date of notification to revise and resubmit your essays for second review during the same window. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until the next exam cycle and its essay application windows. Okay, contacting APA staff. If you have problems along the way, contact APA staff. Here's their exam-related contacts. The general one for the exam is aicpexam@planning.org. They have one or more staff that's responsible for answering those emails. If it's not an emergency, I've found that this is typically the best way that I get a response back from APA staff. There is a phone number, 312-431-9100. Use that for an emergency, such as losing your eligibility card for the exam. If you have problems scheduling your appointment with Prometric, there's the hard to find, sometimes Prometric candidate service call center. Contact at 800-796-9853. You may want to keep those with you so you have them. That's basically the basic presentation, but I'm going to go into a couple of the bulletins and just redo it since we have time. Anybody have any questions before I move on to the part 1, part 2 bulletins?
I have a question about
Yes.
the criterion, and I'm sorry if you already explained this, but
Okay.
are you able to use, if you have, I was a consultant to the state on a multi-year project that could be broken up into multiple phases. Am I able to utilize the first phase of the project to answer criterion 1 and a different phase of the project, different skill set and activities to describe criterion 3? Is it okay to use kind of one experience?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as there's distinct different aspects to it. In other words, a project often has many pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you make it clear that there are different phases that you like I was administrator of the Development of Regional Impact Program. I may take one thing I did one time and another thing I did another time as my examples.
Okay.
Just don't want them to be based off the same instance or the same project in terms of a smaller scale. Okay. Does that help?
Because I played the same role and it was the same project, but it was developing the state expenditure plan for the Restore Act. And so I would talk about the project nomination process, working with the counties for criterion 1 and the process to develop the actual projects with them. And then I would talk about in the third part, there was a very specific role later on in the full 2-year process where I helped them sequence how those projects needed to go and did that kind of on a larger scale with the consortium. So I'm not sure I feel like that's the same project.
Well,
but I feel like I played different roles.
I think that's discrete enough.
Okay.
It's separated in time and separated in what you're trying to accomplish. Okay. That just
Okay.
just try to distinguish it and make it clear.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Now what I want to go to is, well, let me show you first on here. If you go to the APA website, where is all this stuff? Anyways, if you don't know already. Okay, if you just go to, just do a search for something like APA planning, AICP certified or certification. You'll get to get certified. You can click on here and see the time frames for everything. Here's all the exact time frames. Okay, they'll have the process here. They'll have how to apply for, if you're a candidate, or how to apply for certificate your application. You click on all these links. There's lots and lots of links here. If you, let's see, are you eligible? Let's see this. Yeah. Are you eligible here? Use these links on the left. You can see here's your 3 guides: certification applications, certification experience essays, and then the third one, which we'll cover in mid-January, which is registering and taking the exam. There's other stuff here, and all your eligibility requirements, things like that. But if you clicked on one of these and you're logged in, then you can just download the application form, and it's going to look like this for number 1, which looks like this that I've just done here. So this is just the application bulletin. I've highlighted like the number here. There's I should probably highlight that too. There's the 2 contacts that I gave you for how to get through to them if you need. Here's the process. Just remember that you both have to take the exam and do your essays at some point before you become AICP, and it's just the 2 different avenues that they have. As they say, carefully read the guide, and they've streamlined the requirements, so you no longer have to get a letter from your employer, but they have other tips here. Internship can count experience-wise. Part-time professional planning can count. You need to break it out into full-time equivalents. So if you worked, half-time, then that's only going to be, you're going to have to work 2 years of half-time to make 1 year. Experience, volunteering does work. International planning experience can work. So I've just tried to highlight some of the things here. You need to make sure you're an APA member, that you meet the requirements. You're going to submit it online. You have to select your application type once you get in on there, whether you're doing it with the essays or whether you're doing the essays later. Here's your verification for your educational things, the 3 things I told you. Here's some of your things you have to do to verify your employment history. You have to read and verify you've read the Code of Ethics, $70 fee. Here's about talking about how your application doesn't expire. Here's about your educational and other work experience. Here's more details, and there's some places here where they give more details than I did. What can qualify are things like non-professional planning experience, your internship experience, part-time experience. For each one of these, they want to make sure if you're doing something a little bit more administrative, that you were involved in projects, supervision of projects, providing significant input into one or more facets of the project. So that this is where you'd be talking about one facet of a project, second facet of a project that you were involved with, that you want to make your essays for. Internships. Okay, then they get into things that generally that don't qualify, things that are pre-professional, being on elected boards or appointed officials, things like all these different disciplines we mentioned, things that aren't generally included as being planning type activities that we listed. So just that the bulletin covers a lot of what I covered. I'm going to give you that example with the highlights. The more fun one sometimes is the essay. We'll look at this and then we're done. Unless people have other questions, let's open it up. It's trying. Has this been pretty straightforward to understand?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay. I tried to take some things that were complicated to me and in a couple of places make them a little bit easier to understand. All right. So here's the essays. Once your application approved, you can submit your essays, whatever, formerly known as early bird, talked about all delegated, 255. You have to check that you agree to the code of ethics. Now, once the essay review, it's a thorough process, so it may take 8 to 10 weeks for notification. This is because it may have to go, I think we have 2 weeks each of reviewing at different levels, and you may have as many as 3 rounds if the peer reviewers disagree with APA. So that's 6 weeks right there, and then plus getting them back and forth and things like that. So that's why they say 8 to 10 weeks for notification. Here's your 3 criteria that we talked about. Must write 3 short essays that describe how their professional experience aligns with those criteria. And they have to be based on the member's verified plan experience. They must be unique. That is, each essay must be unique. That means just you don't want to take the exact same facet of the project you were working on and just use it twice. So you take one facet, one place of the project, that's another facet, another place. It must be self-contained and self-explanatory. There's no limit, there's no restrictions as far as I'm aware of that you can't take multiple examples from the same professional work experience. You do have to take one specific example for each essay rather than broadly mention multiple examples. And then there's this checklist, which I want to make sure we look at. And then it's pretty much the same sort of stuff we covered where I've highlighted here. I've highlighted a few things and left out a few things because I think where I've done this, I think these are a stronger case than those. I haven't seen these as much made as a case. And that's just my bias. So you can still make it down here, but I just haven't had some of these reviewed the same way. Then they've got a bunch of do's and don'ts. So do describe your participation in a single incident of planning process in a specific type of plan. Don't list different planning activities which you participate in several different planning processes. So they want you to use one for each example. So there's do's and don'ts here, which are mostly same sort of things we evaluated. This is criteria 2 about multiple impacts. You see they have a little maybe expanded list here of things that they consider type of impacts, effects on housing choice, affordability, physical health, air, water quality, habitat, public safety, energy use supply, community identify. Those are just some others. Some of the interventions are the same. Again, I just highlighted some of these, I think, a little stronger case. Then they have do's and don'ts again. Don't discuss only one consequence or speak generally about types of impacts. You know, for where you're supposed to be multiple impacts. For 3, this influencing public decision making in the public interest. You know, I think most of this we've had. Some do's and don'ts. Do explain how your work influenced a specific decision or type of decision. Listing what the elected or appointed officials were and what the decision points were. Don't use an example where you influence a staff level decision or a decision by a private individual organization rather than a decision by public officials. I don't know why it's doing this again. Don't use an example in which public official makes a decision that conflicted with your recommendations or an example in which no decision has yet been made. Do explain how your influence served the public interest. So that's, and then it's just the same sort of stuff that I've talked about before with different types of appeals, things like that, except they've got a little more detail in here, okay? Are any of you getting a scholarship for to take the exam? Okay. I do have a chart that shows the difference in between a scholarship fees and the regular fees. That's basically it, unless somebody's got a question. It's clear as mud. Go
Are
ahead.
scholarships still available? Is that still an option?
There was, okay, first of all, because I'm not the chapter PDO until January 1st, I didn't deal with them. I just asked that question today to APA because I know in Florida, we only gave out 3 out of the 4 scholarships we have. So I've asked whether that scholarship went to another chapter or whether it's still eligible, particularly for the November exam. And if so, when that window may open back up. My understanding of the way it worked was there was a deadline in late November that the chapter had to submit by. I know they submitted it, and there were 3 out of 4, so 1 scholarship did not get used. And I've asked whether that's still available in Florida or not. And the same is going to be true with most other states, but a lot of states only have 1 scholarship offered. Florida, California, obviously being so large with a large membership, we get 4 or more scholarships. That's the best I can tell you right now. That help?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so clear as mud. Everybody knows how to do their application now. All right. What will happen now is tomorrow, for everybody that I've got, they're on my AICP study group list, I will send them out an email tomorrow telling them how to access the FTP. Most of you that have been doing this know how to do that, but I'll explain how to do the FTP site. And that will be where the webinar will be and where the slide presentation will be and where the 2 guides will be. Okay. And then sometime in early January, I'll send out another email talking about our first class session, which will be mid-January. And we'll talk about the registration and test taking, and we'll talk about a lot of things about the exam. It'll be an introduction to the May exam, talking about resources and insights and things like that, putting together some other stuff that I've gotten from some of the past test taker comments, and general introduction to the exam. And then after that, we'll start doing topics. The current plan right now is we will do 3-hour sessions on Thursday night, just like we've done in the past. And then sometime in February, we'll start doing question sessions on Saturday that will probably go for about 4.5 hours. So typically we get around plus or minus 80 contact hours for our class sessions and cover a variety of topics. I will try to put together a list and order of what topics we're going to try to cover, so you have some idea in that. And that's where we're going. So far, I haven't heard from everybody. I haven't seen the final list from APA, but we're right around 80% passage for the November exam. But there may be still some people I haven't heard from, and since I don't have the APA list yet. I can't tell inside or outside Florida how people are doing, outside of the 40 or 50 that come back to me and told me how they're doing. Okay? Yes, no more questions? All right, with
Sounds
that,
good. Thank you.
okay, with
Henry, I
that,
went ahead and emailed APA while we were listening, just to get clarification on the application expiration, and I'll let you know what they say.
okay, but yeah, I don't know how, whether they're going to just basically grandfather you or whether they make that decision long enough ago that the expiration is not happening. Okay,
Right.
I'm going to guess that they're going to tell you that you're okay. Okay, at worst, they may have you redo your essays. But if they approved them before, I don't know why they wouldn't approve them again.
Right, and that was one of the questions that I asked as well in my email.
Okay. All right.
I have a question as well.
Yes.
I got into this meeting late, so probably you already said, but is each essay should be addressing each criterion?
No, each essay addresses one criterion. You do 3 essays.
Okay,
One
so it's
essay
all
for each criterion.
so you
Okay,
need an essay for criterion 1, a second essay for criterion 2, and then a third essay meeting
right,
criterion 3.
right,
Okay.
and they should be discrete. They should not be reproducing the same scenario situation. Okay, they
Okay.
can be a different facet of a more extended program or project or things like that, but they need to deal with different facets. Okay.
Okay.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
seeing that I've still got a few people that joined late that I didn't get unmuted. So I think I've unmuted everybody now. So if anybody that has been muted has a question, I'm here. Except Bert, I don't seem to be able to unmute you. Albert, I don't seem to be able to unmute you. I guess you're offline anyway, maybe. All right. So with that, I'll say goodbye. Feel free to send Susan or me an email about anything to do with the exam at any time. We'll try to help you as best we can. We don't know everything, but we do know a lot of things. Okay. With
Thank you.
that, sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bittaker. Have a good night.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.